I went on tour with Michael Jackson and his brothers in 1981. But it didn't have anything to do with the fact that I had played on 2 sessions on the album that the tour was promoting, which was Triumph. It was called the Triumph Tour. What happened is that in the meantime, this almost a year had passed. The Triumph album came out in 1980, and this was 1981. And in the meantime, I'd gotten in a band with Al McKay, who was one of the founding members of Earth, Wind and Fire, guitar player. He was one of the writers on Shining Star, wrote a lot of their hits, very talented guy. And made a lot of friends in that band, but that band wasn't going anywhere. And one of the friends that I made was Jonathan Moffett, also known as Sugarfoot. But we all called him Foot. Nobody said his nickname was Sugarfoot because on the bass drum, he could, that was his nickname. But when I tell these stories and I say Foot, that's who I'm referring to, because that's what everybody called him, Foot. And I'm sure his mother hated that, But he's one of the sweetest guys in the world, and we're still friends to this day. He's a native of New Orleans and a monster drummer. He played with Michael ages and ages. He toured with Michael all through his career, and he also toured with Madonna, Kool and the Gang, a whole bunch of people. Very talented guy. So anyway, he was in this band with Al McKay, and we both knew that this band wasn't going anywhere. And one day, Jonathan, Sugarfoot Moffett, said, the Jacksons are going on tour and they're looking for a keyboard player. Are you interested? And I said, oh yeah, I'm definitely interested, because as I said, it was rough going in those days as far as earnings-wise for itinerant musicians. And by this time, I had learned how to audition, thanks to Herbie Hancock. So let me interrupt my story with another story. And, maybe some people can benefit by learning how not to blow an audition. I met Herbie Hancock, who was one of my idols and one of my big influences on my playing, when I was working with Stevie. And Herbie and Stevie are friends, have been, for ages. And Herbie would always hang out down at Stevie's studio because it was a fun place to hang out, and why not? So Herbie and I got to know each other. He's a great guy. And he calls me up out of the blue. He was getting ready to go on tour. And I forget which album he was going on tour behind, but he was looking for a second keyboard player to cover the overdubs that he had done on the album. And I said, yeah, it'd be great. So we set up a time, and I went over to his house. He's got this great house in the Hollywood Hills. I bet he's still there. And he had converted his garage into a studio. So he could rehearse in there, he could make demos. So I went over to Herbie Hancock's house, and I played in the greatest garage band ever, because it was Herbie Hancock, Alphonse Mouzon, Wah Wah Watson, Paul Jackson on bass, Benny Mop, and me, and then there was another guy that he had called to audition. And we had a great time. It was so much fun to play with those guys, because you can imagine that was, the Headhunters was about the funkiest band of all time, and Herbie is just, like I said, he already said he was my idol, and he's a genius. Anyway, the kind of guy that Herbie is, he didn't have to, but the next day he called me, and he said, you played better, but I gave it to the other guy because he already knew the songs, and I won't have to teach them to him. I said, well, that's understandable. And he was, you know, he was a cool guy just to do. Most people just wouldn't have bothered to call the person that didn't get the gig. But anyway, so I had learned that lesson. So when Jonathan Foote told me that the Jacksons were looking for a keyboard player, I knew what I had to do. And I had a couple of days, and I got out the records, I learned the songs, and I went one step further, because I'd been working at Guitar Center. I wasn't at this time, but I still had friends at Guitar Center. They let me borrow a Prophet 5 synthesizer, which was about a $4,000 machine. You know, this is 1981. That's a lot of money. They let me borrow the thing. I took it home, programmed the sounds in it from the record, and showed up at the rehearsal hall in Van Nuys with that Prophet 5 with the sounds already in it. So I got the gig. Needless to say, I knew the songs. So if you get a call and you get a chance to audition, do your homework, and it'll increase your chances. Because you know what, the thing with Herbie is he wasn't looking for a keyboard wizard. He was the keyboard wizard in the band. You know, he didn't need somebody that could play 90 miles an hour. That was his job. He just needed someone to cover those overdub parts. Anyway, that's and when you're doing, you have to think about what your role is going to be. If you're going to, you know, if you're going to be playing with Taylor Swift or Madonna or whoever, you know, your role is to help them recreate those records. So that's what I did, and I got the gig, and we started rehearsing, and we rehearsed for 6 weeks, and it was like a job, you know. It was like a 9-to-5 job that we were rehearsing, and we rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed. Almost over-rehearsed, in my opinion, but it was a big production. It was a huge show. They had a special stage built. It had special magic tricks done by, what's the guy's name? Doug Henning, I think, is the magician, the Vegas magician. And costume changes and lights and all this stuff. But in the meantime, we're just in this little rehearsal studio in Van Nuys, where anybody, you know, a million different bands had been. And we got to know each other a little bit over time, just working on the songs and getting the order of them down and getting them right. And the brothers, you know, in the meantime, the brothers are using this. The band's one thing that they've got to get their part, and the brothers are working on the choreography and all of that. And I mean, one story I remember is we were taking a break, and Michael was at the time was so careful about what he ate. He was just completely obsessed about everything had to be, you know, completely organic or whatever. And he was hungry. There was a vending machine, and he stood there for the longest time. We're taking a break. I'm just sitting on a chair in the lobby watching him looking in this vending machine. And he studied that for the longest time. And finally, he takes out a quarter or whatever it was and buys a granola bar. And then he starts studying the label. He hands it to me and he said, I can't, do you want it? You know, there was some ingredient on there that didn't fit with his concept. I don't know what it was. But I felt bad for him because he was hungry. Another time we were taking a break, and it was close to the 4th of July. And some kids came by this rehearsal studio. I can't remember where it was. I'm pretty sure it was Van Nuys. But it was just a nondescript place in like a business park, you know? And these kids came by. They were like high school kids. And they were selling fireworks. They said, hey, we got fireworks. We got M80s. We got cherry bombs. We got everything, you know, buy some. And Michael just said, no, I don't want to buy any fireworks. And this kid was kind of pushy. And I don't think he recognized him, because when Michael was just, you know, when we're just rehearsing, he's like T-shirt and jeans, and, you know, you wouldn't necessarily No, I'm almost certain these kids had no idea that it was the Michael Jackson and the Jacksons. Anyway, this kid was pushy. He said, well, if you don't want to buy any, buy some for your friends. And Michael looked down at his shoes and he said, I don't have any friends. I was like, wow. You know, that was like an odd thing to say, but as I got to know him more, as much as anybody got to know him, it was pretty much true, you know, because he didn't trust people. He was smart enough to know that people wanted to be with him, to be around that star power he had. And I still, at this time, did not know how big a star he was. It wasn't until we got on the tour that happened. But he just, he was something. Another thing I remember is again, not to throw a shade on any of the brothers, they all had their parts to play. Jackie came up to me one time, and I forget what song it was, but he wanted me to play, I think it might have been, at the time it was called Heartbreak Hotel. Now it's called This Place Hotel, because I think the royalties probably kept getting paid to the Elvis song. But it was a song that had a lot of keyboard parts to it. And Jackie came up and said, I want you to play this part. And he described it, and I said, he had a Walkman, a cassette player, and I couldn't hear it. And he said, okay, well, tomorrow I'll bring in a cassette of the 12-inch. You can hear it better. It was some overdub that he had thought of in the studio that he wanted to hear on tour because it had been his idea. And so he heard it. I finally heard it, and I said, okay, because it was way back in the mix. And I said, well, if I play that, I'm going to have to stop playing the parts that I'm playing now. And he said, that's okay, just play this. I said, okay, you know, what do I know, right? He's a Jackson. So we start playing that song, and Michael stops the band. And he said, I'm going to try not to imitate Michael's voice out of respect to him. It's so tempting to go, Bill, what are you doing? But I'm not going to do the Mickey Mouse voice. But he did have that high-pitched voice. All the brothers did. They all talked like that. It was weird. Tito didn't really have it. But I'm trying not to say Tito hand me a tissue. Anyway, that was Eddie Murphy's joke. So, but Michael stopped the band. He goes, Bill, what are you playing there? And I said, well, Jackie wanted me to play this part. And I played it. Michael looked at Jackie and he said, we've got to have a meeting. And all 5 of the brothers left. And I really respected that they did this. Is whenever they had a disagreement, they always wanted to present a unified front to the world. They'd go have a meeting, just the 5 of them, and hash it out. And they were gone for like 40 minutes. They come back, and Michael said, Bill, go back to playing what you were playing. which was a relief, because I was like dropping the essential keyboard parts just for this thing that you couldn't hear until Jackie brought in the 12-inch mix or the B-side or whatever. It was nuts. But 6 weeks in that rehearsal hall, and then we had dress rehearsals in a sound stage in Hollywood. I can't remember which one it was. It might have been, God, it might have been Paramount. No, I think it was the Columbia studio. Anyway, it was a proper movie soundstage, and it was enormous. But they had to have a space that big to fit the stage in, because the stage was something that traveled with them. And they had these enormous lights that raised up on, they didn't have to raise up. It was just part of the show. There's a story about that. I'll sidetrack on that. Michael wanted a sound to accompany that. He wanted to be this big rumbling sound as these lights rise up out of nowhere to start the show, to create excitement. And we went into a recording studio, and I thought, well, this is easy. I'll just use my mini Moog and just some pink noise, and I'll crank up the saturation. There's a way on the mini Moog you can plug in its output into itself and make it like a feedback loop. So we're in the studio with this pink noise, and it should have been shaking the house, but it wasn't as big as what Michael imagined in his head. He said, "Can't you make it any bigger?" And I'm telling the engineer, put some low end on that, will you? And he's pumping up the bass, and it still wasn't doing it. So did a total bluff. I said, we need a modular Moog to do this. Let's call up Studio Instrument Rentals and get a Moog 15 or a 10. I can't remember which it was, but the big expensive Moog. And that came, I mean, this was Hollywood back in those days. You could, well, you probably still can, just pick up the phone and they'll bring you this priceless synthesizer, which I had never operated in my life, but I had operated modular synthesizers when I went to college, ARP 2500. But I patched up the same sound, which was just pink noise going through the low-pass filter, overdriven a little bit, and then, modulating the filter, opening it and closing it slowly just to make a big rumbling sound. And the difference was night and day. I mean, the Mini Moog is based on the same circuitry, but there were some shortcuts taken. But anyway, so I bluffed my way through that. So we had the sound that Michael was looking for, just so these big multicolored lights. And if you look on the cover of the live album that they put out from that tour, you can see those lights. And that was how the show started every night. But we had dress rehearsals with the costumes. We'd all been fitted for dreadful costumes that I didn't like, but it's what what are you going to do when you're not going to wear your street clothes? And in the soundstage next to us, Pat Benatar was doing dress rehearsals for her tour. And I poked my head in there when we were taking a break. I never heard anything that loud in my life. I mean, I've heard, well, maybe the Ramones were louder, but not by much. I mean, I saw Led Zeppelin 5 times. I've seen a whole bunch of loud rock and roll, but that was ungodly loud. But that was it. That was the dress rehearsals. And then we got this document from none other than Gerry Stickells, who is a legend in the business in tour logistics. And it says Jackson's Tour 1981. He says, this itinerary includes all available information on the Jackson's Tour as of July 4th, 1981. I told you it was around July 4th. That's how I spent my holiday. Gerry Stickells did Jimi Hendrix tours. I mean, he was the guy to do all the logistics, because you had to have trucks and roadies, and like the stage was enormous. The lights were enormous. It was amazing stuff. And so there's changes in here, but the whole thing is mapped out for the whole. I'll put in close-ups of this, and I've still got this. This was the Bible for the whole tour, and it told you where the band stayed and where the brothers would stay. The brothers had their bus, and the band had their bus, and there was a bit of divide in the accommodations. But that's how it should be. I mean, why are you going to put up the guitar player at the Four Seasons, right? They were staying high in the hog, and we were in nice hotels. It was nice. It's not like they were cheap with us. And we had our own bus, and they had their own bus. But the first gig we flew from LA to Memphis. And that's when I found out just how big a star Michael Jackson was. Hey, if you're enjoying this video, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe and like buttons. It makes a huge difference. This is a small channel. It's going to stay a small channel unless you help out. So hit those buttons. Doesn't cost anything. No salesman will ever call, and I'll be much obliged. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.